Hello and welcome to Softly Curious. Tonight, you do not need to focus, take notes, or hold on to any single idea. This is a space designed for slow understanding, where information arrives gently and settles naturally, without asking anything in return. As you listen, the world we are about to enter does not demand attention. It simply exists quietly, waiting to be noticed. Barcelon Medin. When people think of penguins, they often picture movement first. A waddle across ice, a sudden dive into dark water, a brief moment of clumsiness that feels familiar and almost comforting. But penguins are not defined by movement as much as they are defined by stillness. Their lives unfold in environments where nothing happens quickly, where waiting is not a pause between events, but the dominant state of being. Before understanding what penguins do or how they live, it is important to understand where they exist. Their environment is not a backdrop. It is an active force that shapes their bodies, their behavior, and even their sense of time. Many penguin habitats are places where the landscape changes very little from one day to the next. Ice stretches outward without clear landmarks. The horizon often dissolves into the sky. Sound travels poorly, and visual cues are limited. In such conditions, survival is not about reacting quickly, but about maintaining balance in a world that rarely offers stimulation. Cold, in these regions, is not experienced as a sudden shock. It is constant, predictable, and deeply embedded into every moment of life. Penguins do not experience cold as humans do, as an external discomfort that interrupts comfort. For them, cold is the default state. Their bodies are not fighting it. They are structured around it. Layers of dense feathers overlap tightly, trapping air close to the skin. Beneath this, a thick layer of fat provides insulation, not as a reserve for emergencies, but as a permanent adaptation. Heat loss is minimized not through activity, but through stillness. Stillness, in fact, is one of the most important survival strategies penguins possess. In a world where energy is expensive and food can be unpredictable, unnecessary movement carries real cost. Penguins often stand for long periods without visible motion, conserving energy while maintaining body temperature. This behavior is not accidental or passive. It is an active form of balance, refined over generations, where doing less is often the most effective response to harsh conditions. Time, in these environments, behaves differently. Days can stretch endlessly under constant light, or collapse into long darkness when the sun disappears for weeks at a time. Penguins do not measure time through clocks or cycles of productivity. Their rhythms are shaped by seasons that move slowly and decisively. Breeding, feeding, molting, and migration all follow patterns that are less about precision and more about alignment with environmental shifts. Missing the right window can mean failure, but rushing never improves the outcome. Many penguin species live far from what humans would consider stable shelter. There are no trees, no permanent structures, no places designed for comfort. Instead, the ground itself becomes temporary shelter. Ice, rock, and snow are not obstacles to be overcome. They are materials to be used. Some penguins balance eggs on their feet to keep them from freezing against the ground, protecting fragile life through body warmth alone. This behavior requires extended stillness and endurance, sometimes lasting months without feeding. In such conditions, sound becomes less important than presence. Loud calls would waste energy and travel poorly across wind-swept landscapes. Instead, penguins rely on subtle vocalizations and, more importantly, memory. Many individuals are able to recognize their mates or offspring among thousands of nearly identical bodies, not through constant calling, but through brief, specific cues. This reliance on recognition, rather than repetition, reflects an environment where efficiency matters more than expression. The vastness of penguin habitats also influences perception. With few visual reference points, orientation becomes critical. Penguins often follow established paths across ice, not because they are the shortest routes, but because they are known. Familiarity reduces risk. Deviating from known paths increases exposure to predators, unstable ice, or exhaustion. In this way, tradition and repetition become survival tools, passed down not through teaching, but through collective behavior. Water, despite its danger, is where penguins truly belong. On land, their bodies appear awkward, constrained by a structure optimized for swimming rather than walking. But this is not a flaw. It is a reflection of priority. Penguins have traded flight for mastery of water, where their streamlined bodies allow them to move with precision and speed. Their bones are denser than those of flying birds, reducing buoyancy and allowing for controlled dives. In water, effort decreases and balance returns. Yet even here, speed is not always the goal. Penguins often dive in patterns that conserve oxygen, adjusting depth and duration based on need rather than urgency. Some species are capable of diving hundreds of meters deep, not in pursuit of spectacle, but because food sources exist there. These dives are measured, controlled, and efficient, reflecting a life shaped by restraint rather than excess. The silence of the underwater world mirrors the quiet of the ice above. Sound travels differently beneath the surface, and visual cues are muted. Penguins rely on memory and instinct, navigating through environments that offer little guidance. This reliance on internal cues, rather than constant external feedback, reinforces a way of living that is inwardly stable, even when surroundings are unpredictable. Predators exist, of course, but encounters are often brief and decisive. There is little room for prolonged conflict. Survival favors awareness and timing over confrontation. Penguins rarely engage in aggressive defense. Instead, they rely on numbers, coordination, and the ability to disappear quickly into water. This collective approach reduces individual burden, distributing risk across the group. Colonies, when observed from a distance, may appear chaotic. Thousands of bodies moving slowly, adjusting positions, exchanging brief signals. But within this apparent disorder is a quiet structure. Spacing matters, movement patterns repeat. Individuals respond not to the entire group, but to those immediately around them. This localized awareness prevents collapse into confusion, allowing large numbers to coexist without constant disruption. What is striking about penguin life is not drama, but restraint. There are few wasted gestures, few unnecessary displays. Everything serves a function, even when that function is simply to conserve energy. In a world that offers little margin for error, moderation becomes strength. As humans, we often associate intelligence with speed, adaptability with constant change, and success with visible progress. Penguins challenge these assumptions. Their survival depends on knowing when not to act, when to remain still, and when to wait. This approach is not passive. It is precise, informed by generations of subtle adjustment to conditions that do not forgive mistakes. The environments penguins inhabit are among the most demanding on Earth, yet they are also remarkably stable in their extremes. This stability allows for deep specialization. Penguins are not generalists. They do not adapt to many worlds. They adapt completely to one. In doing so, they reveal a different model of resilience, one based on harmony rather than dominance. As we continue, we will explore how this quiet world shapes not just penguin bodies, but their relationships, behaviors, and internal rhythms. For now, it is enough to recognize that penguins are not simply animals surviving harsh conditions. They are participants in an environment that rewards patience, balance, and an acceptance of limits. In this stillness, something important becomes visible. Life does not always move forward through expansion or speed. Sometimes it persists through alignment, through learning when to stop, and through understanding that survival does not always require struggle. Sometimes it requires silence. In environments where change arrives slowly, awareness becomes a quiet skill rather than an active effort. Penguins do not scan their surroundings constantly in search of threats or opportunities. Instead, they exist within a state of low-level attentiveness, responding only when necessary. This way of living reduces mental and physical strain, allowing energy to be preserved for moments that truly matter. The absence of visual variety plays an important role in this process. Vast expanses of ice and snow offer few distractions. There is little to draw attention away from the immediate needs of the body: warmth, balance, and timing. In such settings, overstimulation is rare, and focus narrows naturally. Penguins are not required to make frequent decisions. Their lives are guided by patterns that repeat with subtle variations, reinforcing stability over novelty. Weather in these regions does not behave unpredictably. Storms may be intense, but they are rarely sudden. Winds build gradually, temperatures shift within known ranges, and signs of incoming change are often present long before conditions become dangerous. Penguins are attuned to these signals, not through conscious analysis, but through bodily awareness. When to huddle, when to move, and when to remain still are decisions made collectively, guided by shared sensitivity rather than command. Huddling behavior is one of the clearest examples of how environment shapes social structure. In extreme cold, individual warmth is insufficient. Penguins cluster together, forming dense groups that reduce heat loss dramatically. This behavior is not chaotic. Individuals take turns occupying the outer edges of the group, gradually rotating inward. No single penguin remains exposed for too long. The system functions without leadership, relying instead on small adjustments made by many individuals simultaneously. This rotation requires patience and trust. Penguins do not push aggressively toward warmth. Movements are slow, deliberate, and cooperative. Each individual responds to pressure from those around them, creating a fluid structure that adapts continuously. In this way, survival becomes a shared responsibility rather than a competition. Light, or the absence of it, further shapes perception. During long periods of darkness, visual cues lose importance. Penguins rely more heavily on internal rhythms and memory. They do not become disoriented by darkness, because darkness is not treated as an interruption. It is simply another state of the environment. Activity adjusts accordingly, slowing down, becoming more economical. During extended daylight, the opposite occurs. Continuous light removes the usual signals that mark time for most animals. Penguins respond by anchoring their routines to internal cycles rather than external cues. Rest, feeding, and movement occur according to needs rather than clock-like schedules. This flexibility prevents exhaustion and maintains balance in conditions that would otherwise disrupt normal biological rhythms. The landscape itself encourages simplicity. With few hiding places and minimal terrain variation, elaborate strategies offer little advantage. Instead, penguins rely on consistency. Paths across ice are reused until they become familiar routes. These paths reduce uncertainty and lower the cognitive cost of navigation. Even when conditions shift slightly, familiarity provides a sense of stability. Predation risk, though present, reinforces calm rather than panic. In open environments, predators are often visible from a distance. This visibility reduces surprise and allows for measured responses. Penguins do not waste energy reacting prematurely. They wait, assess, and move only when necessary. This restraint minimizes false alarms and preserves group cohesion. The absence of vegetation and complex terrain also limits opportunities for concealment. Rather than hiding, penguins rely on timing and positioning. Entering the water as a group reduces individual risk. Exiting together provides similar protection. These coordinated movements reflect an understanding that safety lies in synchronization rather than isolation. Over time, this way of living shapes behavior deeply. Penguins do not display the constant curiosity seen and animals from more varied environments. Exploration carries risk without offering clear reward. Instead, familiarity becomes valuable. Knowing where to stand, when to move, and how long to wait matters more than discovering something new. This does not mean penguins are inflexible. Adaptation occurs, but slowly, through subtle shifts rather than rapid change. When environmental conditions alter over years or decades, penguin populations adjust migration routes, breeding timing, or colony locations. These changes are not abrupt responses, but gradual recalibrations, reflecting an approach that favors long-term alignment over short-term reaction. Energy management remains central to every aspect of life. Food availability can be unpredictable, and long fasting periods are common. Penguins are capable of enduring extended stretches without eating, relying on stored energy while minimizing expenditure. During these times, movement decreases and priorities narrow. Survival depends not on strength, but on restraint. This restraint extends to reproduction. Breeding is carefully timed to coincide with periods when food will be available for offspring. Mistiming can result in failure, regardless of effort. Penguins do not attempt to compensate through increased activity or risk-taking. If conditions are unfavorable, breeding may be delayed or skipped entirely. This choice reflects an understanding that persistence sometimes means waiting rather than trying harder. The simplicity of the environment also limits sensory overload. Sounds are muted by wind and open space. Smells dissipate quickly. Visual input remains consistent. This sensory quiet allows penguins to remain calm even in large groups. Crowding does not produce constant stress because stimulation remains low. Individuals can exist close together without becoming overwhelmed. In this context, social interactions remain brief and purposeful. Displays are minimal. Communication is efficient. Prolonged conflict would waste energy and disrupt balance. As a result, aggressive encounters are rare and typically resolved quickly. Cooperation is favored not by moral choice, but by environmental necessity. What emerges from this world is a form of intelligence rooted in moderation. Penguins do not solve problems through innovation or improvisation in the moment. They rely on systems refined over time, systems that reduce decision-making and limit exposure to error. This approach produces stability in environments where mistakes are costly. From a human perspective, this way of living can appear uneventful. There are no dramatic pursuits, no constant change, no visible sense of progress. Yet beneath this calm surface exists a finely tuned equilibrium. Every movement, every pause, and even prolonged stillness reflect an adaptation shaped by a world that demands consistency above all else. What seems simple from the outside is the result of long alignment between body, behavior, and environment, where nothing is wasted and nothing is rushed. Penguins are not merely surviving at the edge of habitability. They are deeply integrated into it. Their rhythms follow the pace of their surroundings, not in resistance, but in quiet agreement. This form of resilience is not about overcoming nature, but about fitting within it so completely that struggle becomes unnecessary. Before a penguin swims, feeds, or raises a chick, it stands still balanced within a world where patience is not a virtue, but a requirement. When penguins are described as birds that cannot fly, the statement often feels incomplete. It frames their bodies around something missing, rather than around what is present. In reality, penguins are not shaped by the absence of flight, but by a deep commitment to water. Their bodies reflect a long history of adjustment toward one environment, rather than a failure to succeed in another. Flight demands lightness. Bones must be hollow, muscles arranged for lift rather than endurance, and bodies balanced around air resistance. Penguins moved in the opposite direction. Over time, their bones became denser and heavier, reducing buoyancy and allowing for controlled movement underwater. This added weight, which would be a disadvantage in the air, becomes an asset beneath the surface, where stability matters more than lift. The wings of penguins no longer function as wings in the traditional sense. They have transformed into flippers, rigid and narrow, optimized for propulsion rather than flexibility. These flippers do not fold or flutter. Instead, they generate powerful strokes that move the body smoothly through water. This motion resembles flight in form, but differs entirely in purpose. Penguins do not glide, they push. Each movement is deliberate, measured, and efficient. This transformation affects posture as well. Penguins stand upright on land, not by design, but by necessity. Their bodies are aligned for horizontal movement underwater, not vertical balance on ice. The apparent awkwardness of their walk reflects a body temporarily removed from its preferred medium. In water, this awkwardness disappears. Movement becomes fluid, coordinated, and precise. Feather structure plays a critical role in this transition. Penguins possess far more feathers than most birds, arranged densely and overlapping tightly. These feathers are short and stiff, creating a smooth, water-resistant surface. Beneath this outer layer, air becomes trapped, providing insulation while also reducing drag. The result is a body that retains warmth without sacrificing mobility. Maintaining this feather structure requires constant attention. Penguins spend significant time preening, not as a social ritual, but as a functional necessity. Oils distributed across the feathers preserve waterproofing, while alignment ensures consistent insulation. Any disruption to this system can result in rapid heat loss, especially in cold water. What may appear to be idle grooming is, in fact, maintenance of a critical survival mechanism. Fat distribution further supports this design. Penguins carry substantial fat reserves, not simply as stored energy, but as structural insulation. This layer smooths the body's outline, reducing turbulence while swimming. Unlike animals that rely on muscle mass for warmth, penguins use fat as both protection and stability, contributing to their streamlined shape. Muscle arrangement reinforces endurance over bursts of speed. Swimming demands sustained effort rather than short, explosive movements. Penguins rely on powerful chest muscles to drive their flippers, allowing for long-distance travel without exhaustion. This endurance becomes essential during foraging trips that may last days and cover vast stretches of ocean. Oxygen management is another quiet adaptation. Penguins regulate heart rate and blood flow during dives, directing oxygen toward vital organs while limiting supply to less critical areas. This physiological response allows them to remain underwater longer than most birds, conserving energy while searching for food. The body slows itself down rather than pushing harder, aligning with the broader theme of restraint seen throughout penguin life. Different species express these adaptations in slightly different ways. Larger penguins tend to dive deeper, relying on greater oxygen reserves and body mass to reach colder, more distant feeding grounds. Smaller species remain closer to the surface, trading depth for agility. These differences are not presented as rankings or categories, but as variations on a shared solution to life in water. On land, energy conservation remains essential. Standing still is not inactivity, but strategy. Penguins minimize unnecessary motion, allowing body heat to remain stable while reducing caloric expenditure. Even posture reflects efficiency. Feet are positioned to limit contact with ice, and body weight is shifted to reduce heat loss through extremities. Circulation adapts accordingly. Blood flow to flippers and feet is carefully regulated, reducing heat loss without compromising function. In extreme cold, this balance becomes delicate. Too much restriction risks tissue damage. Too little results in energy loss. Penguins maintain this equilibrium automatically, through systems refined over time rather than conscious control. Breathing patterns mirror this efficiency. Penguins inhale deeply before diving, filling their lungs and air sacs to maximize oxygen availability. Once submerged, Breathing slows to conserve resources. When they surface, recovery is quick and controlled. There is no panic, no urgency. The body moves through familiar cycles without stress. What emerges from these adaptations is not a body built for versatility, but for precision. Penguins are not designed to thrive in many environments. They are designed to function exceptionally well in one. This specialization reduces flexibility, but increases reliability. In conditions where mistakes are costly, reliability becomes invaluable. Seen this way, the inability to fly is not a limitation. It is a byproduct of commitment. Penguins have invested fully in a life defined by water, cold, and restraint. Every aspect of their bodies reflects this choice, from bone density to muscle placement to feather structure. This commitment also shapes how penguins interact with their surroundings. They do not test limits unnecessarily. Movements are economical, decisions conservative. The body itself encourages this behavior, reinforcing patterns that favor endurance over experimentation. As we continue, this connection between body and behavior becomes increasingly clear. The way penguins move, rest, and interact cannot be separated from the physical structures that support them. Their bodies do not merely allow survival in harsh environments. They quietly guide it. A body shaped for water does more than move efficiently. It changes how effort is experienced. For penguins, exertion is not something to be avoided, but something to be managed carefully. Their movements are calibrated to prevent sudden spikes in energy use, allowing them to remain active for long periods without exhaustion. This approach is visible not only in swimming, but in how they stand, turn, and even rest. Balance plays a central role in this system. Penguins are constantly adjusting their center of gravity, especially on unstable surfaces like ice or snow. Micro adjustments in posture help distribute weight evenly, reducing strain on joints and muscles. These corrections happen automatically, guided by sensory feedback rather than conscious control. Over time, this reduces wear on the body and lowers the risk of injury in an environment where recovery is slow. The internal structure of penguin bones supports this balance. Unlike the hollow bones of flying birds, penguin bones are solid and compact. This density increases stability, both in water and on land. It also acts as a form of ballast, allowing penguins to control descent during dives without excessive movement. Rather than fighting buoyancy, they work with gravity, conserving energy while descending toward food sources. Joint flexibility is limited in certain areas, particularly in the wings. This restriction is intentional. By reducing unnecessary range of motion, penguins eliminate inefficiencies that would otherwise dissipate energy. Every movement of the flippers contributes directly to propulsion. There is little wasted motion and little room for error. Precision replaces versatility. Vision adapts accordingly. Underwater, light behaves differently, scattering and dimming rapidly with depth. Penguins possess eyes capable of adjusting focus between air and water, allowing them to hunt effectively in both environments. This dual capability is rare among birds and reflects the importance of seamless transition between mediums. The eyes do not seek detail unnecessarily. They prioritize contrast and motion, identifying prey with minimal visual input. Hearing, while less emphasized, remains functional in both air and water. Penguins are sensitive to low-frequency sounds, which travel farther underwater. This sensitivity aids in orientation and may assist in detecting movement in otherwise visually limited conditions. Again, the emphasis is on efficiency rather than acuity. Enough information is gathered to act without excess stimulation. Thermal regulation continues beneath the surface. Cold water extracts heat rapidly, yet penguins maintain core temperature through layered insulation and controlled circulation. Blood flow is adjusted dynamically, reducing heat loss in extremities while preserving function. This balance allows for extended dives without compromising internal stability. The body adapts moment by moment, responding to temperature changes without conscious effort. Fat reserves, often associated with storage, also serve as shock absorbers. During dives and sudden movements, this cushioning protects internal organs from pressure changes. This function becomes particularly important at greater depths, where pressure increases quickly. The body remains protected not through rigidity, but through controlled compression. Feeding mechanics further illustrate specialization. Penguins capture prey using sharp, backward-facing barbs on their tongues and the roofs of their mouths. Once prey is caught, escape becomes difficult. This adaptation reduces the need for prolonged chases or repeated attempts, conserving energy during feeding. Meals are secured efficiently, aligning with the broader pattern of restraint. Digestive processes reflect the same emphasis on efficiency seen throughout the penguin body. Food is processed quickly, allowing energy to be absorbed and used without long delays. This supports extended foraging trips, where timing matters and unnecessary wait becomes a liability. Waste is minimized, and internal systems prioritize what is essential, reinforcing a body that functions with little margin for excess. Rest follows a similar logic. Penguins often sleep while standing, conserving warmth and remaining ready to respond to their surroundings. Sleep may occur in short, repeated intervals rather than long, uninterrupted periods, allowing recovery without complete disengagement. This pattern maintains awareness in environments where vulnerability carries real cost, balancing rest with readiness. Taken together, these traits shape behavior as much as biology. Penguins rarely engage in unnecessary exploration or prolonged play, not because curiosity is absent, but because restraint is encouraged by the body itself. Across different species, variations in size, diving depth, and movement exist, yet a shared pattern remains: predictability over experimentation, coordination over excess. The body becomes a quiet guide, narrowing choices and aligning individuals toward stability, setting the foundation for how penguins move together, live together, and endure demanding conditions without constant struggle. In environments where food is not guaranteed and energy cannot be wasted, daily life follows a different logic. Penguins do not organize their days around constant activity. Instead, their time is divided into long periods of stillness, interrupted by brief but purposeful movement. This structure is not accidental. It reflects a precise understanding of when action produces benefit and when it only drains reserves. Much of a penguin's day is spent standing, resting, or waiting. From a human perspective, this can appear unproductive. In reality, it is one of the most important survival behaviors they possess. Remaining still reduces energy expenditure, limits heat loss, and preserves strength for moments when movement is unavoidable. In cold environments, even small, unnecessary motions can carry measurable cost. Feeding does not occur continuously. Penguins rely on short, intensive foraging periods rather than constant searching. When they enter the water to hunt, effort is concentrated and deliberate. Once sufficient food has been gathered, activity decreases again. This pattern allows them to balance intake and expenditure without exhausting themselves. Searching endlessly would burn more energy than it provides. Periods of fasting are common, especially during breeding or molting. Penguins are capable of going days or even weeks without eating, depending on species and circumstance. During these times, their metabolism slows, movement becomes minimal, and priorities narrow. The body shifts from growth or exploration toward maintenance alone. This metabolic adjustment allows survival during extended scarcity. Waiting is not passive in these moments. Penguins remain alert, adjusting posture and orientation to minimize heat loss and exposure. Small movements occur when necessary, but only to maintain balance or comfort. The difference between standing efficiently and standing carelessly can determine how long stored energy lasts. Over time, these small efficiencies accumulate. Timing governs nearly every action. Penguins do not enter the water randomly. Conditions such as light, tide, predator presence, and group readiness influence decisions. Delaying entry by even a short period can reduce risk significantly. Acting too early can expose individuals to danger or wasted effort. This sensitivity to timing reflects a life shaped by consequence rather than impulse. Movement on land follows similar principles. Walking is slow, measured, and limited to what is required. Penguins do not roam. Routes between resting areas, breeding sites, and the water are reused repeatedly. Familiar paths reduce uncertainty and prevent unnecessary detours that would increase energy loss. Habit becomes efficiency. During breeding seasons, activity narrows further. One parent may remain stationary for extended periods while the other forages. This division of labor requires precise timing and trust. Leaving too early or returning too late can compromise offspring survival. As a result, patience becomes as important as action. Waiting is not delay. It is responsibility. Environmental cues guide these decisions more than internal desire. Weather shifts, light changes, and subtle temperature differences inform behavior. Penguins respond to these signals without urgency, adjusting slowly rather than reacting sharply. Sudden movement rarely improves outcomes in their world. Gradual adjustment does. Sleep patterns reflect the same logic. Penguins do not always sleep deeply or for long, uninterrupted periods. Rest occurs in intervals, often while standing. This allows recovery without full disengagement from surroundings. The balance between rest and awareness reduces vulnerability while preserving strength. Even social interactions are shaped by this rhythm. Penguins do not seek constant engagement. Proximity provides warmth and safety, but interactions remain brief. Prolonged conflict or display would drain energy without benefit. Cooperation emerges not from social preference, but from shared necessity. Over time, these patterns produce a life that appears calm, but is tightly regulated. Nothing happens by accident. Stillness, movement, feeding, and rest all occur within narrow windows, defined by environment and energy availability. Penguins do not rush because rushing offers no advantage. They do not linger in motion because motion is costly. What becomes clear is that slowness is not a trait, but a strategy. Penguins move slowly because their world rewards precision over speed. Acting at the wrong time carries greater risk than acting late. Waiting preserves options. Moving commits resources. This way of living contrasts sharply with environments where food is abundant and danger unpredictable. In such places, rapid response and constant movement offer advantage. For penguins, the opposite is true. Stability favors restraint. By organizing life around controlled effort and extended stillness, penguins maximize survival in conditions where margin for error is thin. They do not adapt by doing more. They adapt by doing exactly what is necessary, and nothing beyond that. This rhythm does not change daily. It remains consistent across seasons, shifting only when environmental conditions demand it. The result is a life governed not by urgency, but by alignment with scarcity and cold. Understanding this pattern reveals why penguins appear calm, even in harsh conditions. Their lives are not built on reacting to stress, but on avoiding it whenever possible. By reducing unnecessary action, they reduce unnecessary risk. This approach sets the foundation for how penguins interact with each other, how they raise young, and how they endure long periods without abundance. The rhythm of their days is not empty time. It is carefully managed survival. The slow rhythm that governs individual behavior extends naturally into social life. Penguins do not form groups for comfort alone. They do so because coordination reduces risk and conserves energy. Living close together allows individuals to share warmth, minimize exposure, and reduce the need for constant movement. In environments where standing still is often safer than acting, proximity becomes a practical solution rather than a social preference. Colonies are structured around predictability. Each penguin occupies a familiar space, returning to it repeatedly. This spatial consistency reduces conflict and eliminates the need for constant negotiation. Individuals do not compete aggressively for position. Instead, they adjust gradually, responding to pressure from neighbors with small movements rather than force. This slow exchange maintains order without disruption. Chick care is one of the areas where this rhythm becomes most visible. Parents do not protect their young through constant movement or activity. Instead, prolonged stillness becomes the primary strategy. By using their bodies as a barrier, they keep chicks warm, reduce environmental exposure, and limit unnecessary energy loss. Small adjustments during this time-shifting position, redistributing weight, are not trivial. They are essential for survival. The division of responsibility between parents is governed by timing rather than urgency. While one individual leaves to forage, the other remains and waits. This waiting requires patience, but it is not unplanned. Returns are adjusted based on environmental conditions and energy needs. A delay does not automatically signal failure. More often, it reflects adaptation to changing circumstances. Movement within the colony is limited. Penguins do not circulate aimlessly. Paths are reused, directions are familiar, and deviations are rare. This reduces both physical effort and confusion. When many individuals share the same constraints, coordinated behavior emerges naturally. No explicit signals are required to enforce order. Shared limitation does the work. Risk management also depends on this slow rhythm. Colonies do not respond to threats with immediate action. Movement is often delayed, which helps prevent false alarms. When real danger does appear, the response is collective and decisive. This approach relies less on individual panic and more on shared assessment. Social interactions remain brief and functional. Prolonged conflict is rare because its physical and energetic cost is high. Penguins tend to ignore minor disturbances or resolve them through small positional adjustments rather than escalation. This behavior is not a personality trait. It is the outcome of environmental pressure. This rhythm is learned early by young penguins. Chicks spend more time observing than exploring. They learn to wait rather than to move. Understanding when to remain still, when to approach, and when to withdraw comes not from direct instruction, but from watching the quiet order of the colony. Over time, this learning aligns individual behavior with collective patterns. Young penguins do not rush because they observe the consequences faced by those that do. Individuals that move quickly expend more energy, take greater risks, and make more frequent mistakes. Slowness is reinforced through observable outcomes. As seasons change, the rhythm adjusts, but the core principle remains unchanged. Activity levels may increase, waiting periods may shorten, but urgency never dominates. Penguins adapt to conditions without reinventing their behavior. This consistency supports long-term survival. From the outside, this way of life may appear static. Internally, however, constant adjustment is taking place. Small movements, brief pauses, and minor decisions accumulate over time. Large changes are rare because small corrections are usually sufficient. In the end, the slow life of penguins is not passive. It is carefully managed at every level. Time is treated as a limited resource, not something to be filled with constant action. Energy is guarded closely, spent only when the return justifies the cost. Risk is neither ignored nor confronted impulsively, but assessed through patience and restraint. Nothing in their daily lives happens without reason. Movement, waiting, and stillness all serve specific purposes, even when those purposes are not immediately visible. This careful management allows penguins to endure not only as individuals, but as colonies that function with remarkable stability. Slowness does not weaken them. It reduces friction, prevents unnecessary conflict, and aligns many individuals toward the same goal. By moving slowly, they move together. By limiting action, they preserve coordination. Through this shared rhythm, penguins maintain an ordered, calm, and sustainable way of life, one capable of persisting even under the most demanding environmental conditions. In large penguin colonies, the most striking feature is not noise, but restraint. Thousands of individuals occupy the same limited space, yet constant communication is absent. Penguins do not announce themselves continuously, nor do they rely on persistent signaling to maintain order. Instead, sound is used sparingly, reserved for moments when identification or coordination is necessary. Silence, rather than confusion, becomes the default state. This selective use of sound serves a practical function. In dense colonies, constant calling would blur signals, increase stress, and waste energy. Penguins avoid this by narrowing communication to what is essential. Vocalizations are short, specific, and purposeful. A call is not an expression of presence, but a tool for recognition. When it is no longer needed, it stops. Recognition is central to colony life. Despite the apparent uniformity of penguin appearance, individuals are not anonymous to one another. Mates and chicks are identified primarily through sound, not sight. Each penguin produces a vocal pattern with distinct frequency and rhythm, allowing recognition even in crowded environments. This ability does not require continuous calling. A brief exchange is often enough to confirm identity. This system reduces unnecessary interaction. Penguins do not need to constantly check their surroundings to know where they belong. Familiar locations, repeated routes, and recognized neighbors create a stable social landscape. Order is maintained through repetition rather than enforcement. No individual directs the colony, yet structure persists. Within this quiet framework, mate selection takes place without ceremony. Penguins do not engage in elaborate displays or prolonged courtship rituals. Choice is made through observation and outcome rather than performance. The criteria are practical. A suitable partner is one who contributes directly to reproductive success, not one who signals dominance or appeal. In several penguin species, nest quality plays a decisive role. Nests are often built from stones, which provide elevation, drainage, and insulation. These stones are not decorative. They protect eggs from melting ice, flooding, and temperature fluctuations. A poorly constructed nest increases the likelihood of egg loss, regardless of parental effort. As a result, the ability to gather and maintain stones becomes a visible measure of suitability. Males that accumulate more stones, or stones of better size and placement, demonstrate access to resources and the capacity to invest energy effectively. This accumulation is not symbolic. It directly improves the survival prospects of offspring. Female choice reflects this reality. Preference is shown toward males whose nests offer greater stability. The decision is not abstract or emotional. It is based on a clear relationship between nest structure and reproductive outcome. Better nests lead to higher success. The behavior persists because it works. Stone availability, however, is limited. In crowded colonies, suitable stones are a shared resource under constant demand. This scarcity produces competition, but not in the form of prolonged conflict. Instead, opportunistic behavior emerges. Some penguins take stones from neighboring nests, particularly when owners are absent. This behavior is common enough to be considered part of the system rather than an exception. Stone theft does not escalate into chaos because it carries cost. Attempting to take stones risks confrontation, which expends energy and may result in loss of position or injury. As a result, theft tends to be brief and calculated. Penguins rarely engage in extended disputes over resources. The energy cost of escalation outweighs the benefit. This balance keeps the system stable. Stones move between nests, but colonies do not collapse into disorder. Each individual operates within limits defined by energy expenditure and risk. Those who overextend lose more than they gain. Those who act within constraint persist. What appears, from a human perspective, as contradiction, cooperation alongside theft is in fact consistency. Both behaviors arise from the same principle: resource management under constraint. Penguins do not follow rules enforced by authority or morality. They follow outcomes shaped by environment and energy balance. Communication remains minimal throughout these interactions. There are no warnings issued, no negotiations conducted. A brief response, a repositioning of the body, or a momentary vocalization is sufficient. Most conflicts resolve without sound at all. Silence limits escalation and preserves stability. This restrained social structure allows colonies to function at scale. Large numbers of individuals coexist without continuous signaling, instruction, or correction. Recognition replaces announcement. Habit replaces negotiation. Physical limitation replaces rule enforcement. Within this system, individual behavior aligns naturally with collective order. Penguins do not need to understand the colony as a whole. They only need to respond to immediate conditions. The larger structure emerges from repeated local interactions, each governed by the same constraints. Mate selection, resource competition, and recognition all operate under this shared logic. Nothing is excessive. Nothing is theatrical. Every action produces a measurable effect, and behaviors that do not contribute to survival are gradually eliminated. The result is a social world that appears calm, even understated. Yet beneath this calm lies a precise system shaped by scarcity, repetition, and consequence. Penguins do not organize their societies through intention or design. Order emerges because disorder is too costly. This quiet efficiency defines their social lives as clearly as it defines their bodies and daily rhythms. Penguins do not need to communicate often because they do not need to improvise. Their world rewards predictability, and their behavior reflects that reward. In silence, recognition holds. In limited choice, strategy appears. In scarcity, behavior sharpens. The mysteries of penguin society are not hidden in complexity, but in restraint, where less action, less sound, and fewer signals create a system that endures. When mate selection fails, penguin society does not intervene to correct it. There is no second chance offered through cooperation, and no collective adjustment made to compensate for a weak pairing. Nests that are poorly built remain vulnerable. Eggs placed on unstable ground are more likely to be lost to flooding, shifting ice, or temperature fluctuation. These outcomes are not dramatic, but they are decisive. Failure does not trigger response. It simply removes that path from continuing. This lack of intervention is not indifference. It is efficiency. In environments where resources are limited, correcting individual failure would cost more than allowing it to end. Penguins do not reinforce weak systems. They allow consequences to play out quickly and quietly. Over time, this keeps the colony aligned with what works. Pair bonds, often perceived as fixed, are not immune to outcome. While some penguin species form long-term pairings, these bonds persist only when they continue to produce results. A consistently unsuccessful nesting season increases the likelihood of separation. Repairing is not framed by loyalty or betrayal, but by practical recalibration. A partnership exists only as long as it contributes to reproductive success. Stone competition reflects this same logic. Nests that lose stones repeatedly become less attractive, both physically and socially. As stones shift from one nest to another, the colony subtly redistributes advantage. No individual directs this process. It emerges through repeated localized interactions where success accumulates and failure dissipates. Importantly, escalation remains rare. Penguins do not defend resources aggressively for long periods. Extended conflict costs too much energy and increases exposure. Most confrontations end quickly, either through withdrawal or positional adjustment. The system favors restraint over dominance. Those who push too far lose more than they gain. Recognition also plays a role in limiting disorder. Penguins remember neighbors, locations, and patterns of interaction. This familiarity reduces repeated conflict. A penguin does not need to test boundaries constantly. It already knows which nests are stable, which neighbors are persistent, and which actions are likely to provoke response. Memory replaces enforcement. When conditions shift, such as changes in stone availability or nesting terrain, the system adapts without redesign. Penguins do not alter their behavior dramatically. Instead, the same rules produce different outcomes. Some nests disappear, others consolidate. The colony changes shape, but not logic. There is no central correction when imbalance appears. Colonies do not reorganize deliberately. They thin, shift, or fail at the edges. What remains is what aligns with current conditions. This process is slow, often imperceptible in the moment, but decisive over time. Social silence remains intact throughout these changes. Penguins do not vocalize distress when nests fail, nor do they announce success. Communication does not increase when pressure rises. If anything, it becomes more selective. Sound is conserved for recognition, not reaction. This restraint prevents panic. Without constant signaling, stress does not propagate rapidly through the colony. Local failure stays local. It does not cascade into widespread disruption. Each nest operates largely independently, buffered by the quiet structure of the group. In this way, penguin society avoids collapse, not through strength or force, but through limitation. The range of possible choices is narrow, and this narrowness is deliberate. Behaviors are constrained by energy cost, environmental pressure, and repeated outcomes. What emerges is a social structure that does not attempt to correct every mistake. Instead, it allows ineffective strategies to fade on their own. Nests that fail are not reinforced. Pairings that do not produce results quietly dissolve. Success continues simply because it works. Failure ends because it cannot sustain itself. There is no intervention, no adjustment made in the name of fairness or balance. The system moves forward by filtering, not by repair. The underlying logic is not complex, but sufficient. Penguins do not rely on elaborate rules, constant communication, or centralized coordination to maintain order. Stability is produced through repetition, consequence, and long-established patterns. Silence plays an active role in this process. By reducing reaction, the colony prevents stress, conflict, and uncertainty from amplifying. What is not responded to does not grow. In an environment where energy is limited and errors are costly, minimal response becomes a form of intelligence. Penguins endure not because they are endlessly flexible, but because they are precise. They do not adjust quickly or dramatically. Instead, they adjust correctly, allowing only those changes that align with existing constraints. Adaptation is slow, but it is accurate. This quiet, consequence-driven structure completes the picture of penguin social life. Recognition, mate choice, competition, and loss all operate under the same restrained principle. Nothing is exaggerated. Nothing is prolonged beyond necessity. Each outcome resolves at the smallest effective scale and no larger. At a distance, penguins appear remarkably similar. Their posture, coloring, and movement suggest a single solution repeated across different places. This visual consistency creates the impression of uniformity, as if one design has simply been copied and placed into slightly different environments. But this resemblance is deceptive. Beneath it lies a set of small biological differences that quietly redefine how each penguin survives. These differences are not dramatic. They do not announce themselves through obvious features or exaggerated behaviors. Instead, they operate subtly, influencing how long a penguin can wait without food, how deep it can dive, how far it can travel, and how much risk it can absorb before consequences appear. Over time, these small variations accumulate, producing lives that look similar on the surface but function very differently underneath. Body size is one of the most influential of these differences. Larger penguins tend to retain heat more effectively, lose energy more slowly, and tolerate longer periods without feeding. Smaller penguins, by contrast, operate on tighter margins. They must eat more frequently, move more often, and recover more quickly. Neither approach is superior. Each reflects a trade-off shaped by environment and opportunity. The emperor penguin represents one extreme of this balance. Its size allows it to endure conditions that would overwhelm most other birds. Long periods of fasting are possible because stored energy is lost slowly. Heat is conserved efficiently. Movement can be reduced to a minimum without immediate consequence. This physical buffer creates time to wait, time to endure, time to survive events that unfold slowly. This capacity shapes behavior. Emperor penguins do not need to feed frequently. Instead, they rely on fewer, deeper foraging efforts. Dives extend far below the surface, reaching colder, darker waters, where food remains available when shallower sources disappear. These dives are not rushed. They are deliberate and calculated, supported by physiology designed to manage pressure, oxygen, and temperature simultaneously. Waiting becomes central to this strategy. Extended stillness does not threaten survival because the body is prepared for it. Risk is distributed over longer periods, reducing the need for constant adjustment. When conditions are harsh, endurance provides advantage. When opportunity appears, effort is concentrated and purposeful. The king penguin operates under a slightly different balance. Similar in appearance but distinct in function, it occupies environments that allow for more frequent access to food. Its body supports long-distance travel rather than extreme fasting. Instead of enduring absence, it invests in movement. Journeys to feeding grounds can be lengthy, requiring sustained swimming over extended distances. This difference alters timing. King penguins align their lives with predictable cycles of food availability, traveling when conditions allow and returning when resources are sufficient. Endurance remains important, but it is expressed through movement rather than waiting. Energy is spent more consistently rather than conserved over long periods of inactivity. These distinctions are subtle but decisive. A body optimized for endurance without food produces different decisions than one optimized for endurance through movement. Both strategies succeed, but only within the conditions they evolve to match. When environments shift, these differences become increasingly visible. Smaller species reveal another layer of variation. The Adelie penguin, for example, lives within tighter energetic limits. Its smaller body loses heat more quickly and stores less energy. As a result, long fasting periods are not viable. Instead, survival depends on frequent access to food and rapid recovery between efforts. This necessity produces a faster rhythm. Adelie penguins move more often, feed more frequently, and adjust their behavior quickly in response to changing conditions. Waiting too long carries greater risk. Inactivity becomes dangerous when reserves are limited. Precision replaces patience. This rhythm shapes social behavior as well. Colonies operate with a more dynamic flow, responding to shorter cycles of opportunity and constraint. Movement patterns shift more readily, and foraging efforts are closely tied to immediate availability rather than long-term endurance. The Gentoo penguin expresses yet another variation. Known for its speed and agility in water, it relies on rapid, repeated dives rather than extended depth or long-distance travel. Its body favors quick acceleration and frequent feeding, allowing it to exploit food sources efficiently when they are available. This approach minimizes exposure to prolonged risk. Short dives reduce time spent in vulnerable states, while speed increases success rates during hunting. Energy is spent often, but recovered quickly. The margin for error remains narrow, but responsiveness compensates. At the smaller end of the spectrum, species such as the little penguin face the most restrictive conditions. Their size limits energy storage and insulation. Heat loss occurs rapidly, and fasting capacity is minimal. Survival depends on consistency rather than endurance. For these penguins, feeding must occur regularly. Delays are costly. Movement becomes a necessity rather than a choice. The environment they inhabit must provide reliable access to food, or survival becomes uncertain. This dependence creates vulnerability, but it also enables flexibility. When conditions are favorable, smaller bodies respond quickly and efficiently. Across these examples, a pattern emerges. The same fundamental challenges, cold, scarcity, predation, are addressed through different combinations of size, movement, and timing. No single solution dominates. Each species occupies a narrow window where its particular balance remains effective. These balances are fragile. A strategy built on long fasting fails when food becomes unpredictably scarce at critical moments. A strategy built on frequent feeding fails when access becomes intermittent. A body optimized for deep diving struggles when prey shifts closer to the surface. Small changes in environment can therefore produce outsized effects. This sensitivity is not accidental. Penguins are not generalists. Their success depends on alignment rather than adaptability. Each species performs exceptionally well within specific conditions, but carries limited tolerance for deviation. The closer the fit, the higher the efficiency, and the greater the risk when conditions change. Behavior reflects this precision. Penguins do not experiment widely. They repeat what works. Over time, repetition reinforces specialization, narrowing the range of viable responses. This narrowing increases success within stable conditions, while reducing resilience to disruption. The mystery lies in how little difference is required to produce these outcomes. A few centimeters of body size, slight variations in muscle distribution, small shifts in metabolism, each alters the balance enough to change daily life completely. From the outside, these differences are easy to miss. From the inside, they determine survival. This is why penguins that appear nearly identical can occupy distinct ecological roles. They are not interchangeable. Each represents a solution tuned to a particular set of constraints. Remove one solution from its context, and its strengths become liabilities. Understanding penguins through this lens shifts perspective. Instead of asking which species is strongest or most resilient, the more accurate question becomes which species fits its environment most precisely. Strength, in this case, is not about capacity, but about match. As conditions fluctuate, this precision becomes increasingly important. When resources shift even slightly, some strategies gain advantage while others falter. These outcomes are not immediate. They unfold gradually, often invisibly, until patterns become clear. What remains consistent is the role of small differences. They do not draw attention to themselves, yet they guide behavior, shape risk, and determine limits. Penguins do not announce these differences. They live them. By examining these variations, the illusion of uniformity dissolves. What appears to be a single way of life becomes a collection of finely tuned responses, each quietly solving the same problems in a different way. This understanding sets the stage for deeper examination. Beyond size and movement lie differences in timing, social structure, and reproductive strategy, each influenced by the same subtle variations already at work. For now, it is enough to recognize that penguins survive not because they share a single solution, but because they embody many. Their similarities mask a deeper diversity, one measured not in appearance, but in how life is managed under constraint. The differences between penguin species become most visible when conditions are no longer ideal. During periods of abundance, many strategies appear equally successful. Food is available, weather remains within familiar limits, and timing aligns naturally. Under these circumstances, variation stays subtle. It is only when conditions tighten that the consequences of small differences emerge. Reproduction is one of the first areas where this divergence becomes clear. Species capable of enduring long fasting periods can afford longer incubation times and extended parental roles. Their bodies allow them to wait while eggs develop, even when access to food is delayed. This patience increases stability during predictable seasons, but it depends entirely on conditions remaining within known bounds. Species with smaller bodies face a different calculation. Limited energy reserves mean that incubation and chick rearing must align closely with food availability. Timing becomes critical. A short delay in feeding can have immediate consequences. As a result, these species tend to operate within narrower seasonal windows, where success depends on precision rather than endurance. Risk-taking behavior reflects these constraints. Larger penguins can absorb mistakes more easily. A delayed return from a foraging trip or an unsuccessful dive does not immediately threaten survival. Smaller penguins, by contrast, carry less margin. Risk must be managed carefully because recovery options are limited. This does not mean they take fewer risks, but that their risks are shorter and more frequent rather than prolonged. This distinction shapes how failure is handled. In species with greater endurance, failure unfolds slowly. A missed opportunity may be compensated for later. In species with tighter margins, failure is abrupt. There is little buffer. Outcomes become binary, success or loss, with few intermediate states. Chick survival mirrors this pattern. Larger species often invest heavily in fewer offspring, relying on stable conditions and prolonged care. Smaller species may produce offspring that mature more quickly, requiring less sustained investment but greater immediate support. Each approach carries trade-offs that reflect the same underlying differences in body size and energy management. Environmental variability amplifies these contrasts. When food sources shift unpredictably, species that rely on frequent feeding face immediate pressure. Their strategies leave little room for delay. Species built for endurance may initially withstand scarcity, but prolonged disruption eventually undermines even their advantages. No strategy is immune. Each simply fails in a different way. Predation risk also interacts with these differences. Penguins that feed deeper or farther from shore may encounter different predators than those that remain closer to the surface. Body size influences escape options, dive duration, and recovery time. What constitutes acceptable risk for one species becomes unacceptable for another, even within the same environment. Over time, these pressures shape population patterns. Some species respond to changing conditions by declining rapidly, others by adjusting more slowly. These shifts are not evenly distributed. They follow the contours of specialization. The more precise the fit between body and environment, the higher the efficiency and the lower the tolerance for disruption. This precision explains why penguin species rarely replace one another directly. When one declines, another does not simply move into its place. Each occupies a distinct niche defined by subtle differences. The loss of one strategy cannot be compensated by another without fundamental mismatch. What appears from a distance as vulnerability is in fact specificity. Penguins are not designed to respond broadly. They are designed to respond correctly under particular conditions. When those conditions drift, the response remains the same until it no longer works. This is where the quiet tension of penguin survival becomes visible. Stability brings success, but also dependence. Small changes accumulate unnoticed until thresholds are crossed. When that happens, outcomes shift decisively, often without dramatic warning. The mystery lies not in sudden collapse, but in delayed consequence. Strategies that once worked continue unchanged even as conditions move away from alignment. Penguins do not adjust quickly because their strength lies in consistency. By the time failure becomes apparent, options are already limited. Across species, this pattern repeats. Variation does not protect against change by itself. It simply determines how change is experienced. Some species feel pressure early, others later. Some decline sharply, others gradually. None escape entirely. Yet this diversity of outcomes also reflects resilience at a broader scale. While individual species face limits, the group as a whole represents multiple solutions to the same set of challenges. Diversity does not guarantee survival for each strategy, but it increases the likelihood that some will remain viable. This balance between specialization and vulnerability defines the penguin lineage. Small differences create efficiency, but also fragility. Survival depends on maintaining alignment, not on improvisation. Understanding this reveals why penguins feel both robust and precarious at the same time. Their lives are not governed by constant struggle, but by sustained precision. When precision holds, they thrive. When it falters, decline follows quietly. In this way, penguins embody a broader principle. Adaptation does not always mean flexibility. Sometimes it means committing fully to a narrow solution and trusting the environment to remain compatible. When that trust is rewarded, success appears effortless. When it is broken, consequences unfold without drama, but with certainty. This concludes the exploration of how small differences shape survival. What remains is to understand what happens when the balance itself begins to shift, not between species, but between penguins and the world they depend on. For a long time, the world penguins inhabit has rewarded precision. Their bodies, behaviors, and social structures evolved to function within narrow margins, where timing mattered more than speed and restraint mattered more than force. As long as conditions remained consistent, this balance held. Not perfectly, but reliably enough to persist across generations. The system penguins rely on is not built for rapid adjustment. It does not respond well to sudden shifts or unpredictable patterns. Instead, it depends on alignment between temperature and food availability, between breeding cycles and seasonal change, between effort and return. When these elements move together, the system works quietly and efficiently. When they drift apart, problems appear. One of the first signs of imbalance emerges in timing. Penguins do not breed opportunistically. Their reproductive cycles are closely matched to periods when food will be available at specific stages of chick development. If food arrives too early or too late, effort is wasted. Eggs may hatch when parents are absent, or chicks may require feeding when prey is scarce. These mismatches are not corrected through increased activity. Penguins do not compensate by hunting longer or moving faster. Their bodies are not designed for that kind of response. This is where limitation becomes visible. Penguins cannot simply push harder when conditions worsen. Extended foraging increases exposure and energy loss. Prolonged movement leads to faster depletion of reserves. Attempting to override environmental signals often results in failure rather than success. The system does not reward persistence beyond its limits. Food availability itself is another fragile point. Many penguin species rely on predictable prey patterns that follow temperature gradients and seasonal cycles. When these patterns shift, penguins do not immediately change strategy. Their feeding behaviors are specialized and repeated. Adaptation, when it occurs, is slow. In the short term, scarcity leads to reduced breeding success rather than behavioral innovation. This does not mean penguins are unaware of change. They respond to immediate conditions, weather, ice stability, local prey presence, but these responses remain constrained. A penguin cannot choose a completely new food source or relocate breeding sites without cost. Movement carries risk. Familiarity provides safety. Leaving known routes and locations introduces uncertainty that the system is not designed to absorb easily. Reproductive effort reflects this caution. When conditions deteriorate, penguins do not always attempt to breed. Skipping a season is sometimes the most viable option. This restraint prevents complete collapse, but also limits recovery. A missed breeding opportunity cannot be reclaimed later. Time lost is permanent. Population effects accumulate quietly, rather than appearing as sudden declines. Chick survival becomes the most sensitive indicator of imbalance. Young penguins depend entirely on precise timing and consistent care. Even small disruptions in feeding schedules or temperature control can lead to loss. Parents do not abandon chicks intentionally, but delayed returns and insufficient reserves produce the same outcome. The system does not adapt to save individual failures. It absorbs them. Social structure offers limited buffering. Colonies do not redistribute resources or coordinate collective responses to scarcity. Each pair operates within its own constraints. This independence prevents widespread disruption, but it also prevents targeted correction. Failure remains localized, but it is not resolved. What makes this system appear resilient is its calm response to stress. There is no visible panic, no frantic escalation of behavior. Penguins continue to act within familiar patterns even as conditions degrade. This steadiness delays obvious signs of trouble, creating the impression of stability long after margins have narrowed. Over time, however, consequences accumulate. Reduced breeding success compounds across seasons. Younger cohorts shrink. Recovery becomes slower. These changes are rarely dramatic. They unfold gradually, often unnoticed, until patterns become difficult to ignore. The critical point is not that penguins fail when conditions change, but that they fail quietly. Their system does not break loudly. It erodes. Precision, once an advantage, becomes rigidity when alignment is lost. The same traits that once ensured success limit flexibility. Yet within this fragility lies a form of strength. Penguins do not exhaust themselves attempting to overcome impossible conditions. They do not escalate effort endlessly. By remaining within constraint, they avoid catastrophic collapse. Loss occurs, but it is contained. The system sacrifices parts to preserve the whole. This approach contrasts with strategies based on constant adjustment or aggressive expansion. Penguins do not chase opportunity wherever it appears. They wait for compatibility. When compatibility fades, they reduce activity rather than intensify it. This choice preserves energy and prevents runaway failure. Understanding this reveals the true nature of penguin resilience. It is not based on adaptability in the moment, but on refusal to exceed limits. Penguins endure by knowing where effort stops being useful. They survive by avoiding actions that would worsen outcomes. As balance shifts, a system does not reinvent itself. It holds its shape for as long as alignment allows, then contracts. This contraction is not collapse. It is containment. Life continues within narrower bounds. This quiet response completes the picture of penguin existence. Their lives are governed not by constant struggle, but by adherence to thresholds. When those thresholds are crossed, behavior does not escalate, it withdraws. The result is a world that feels calm, even under pressure. Penguins do not dramatize difficulty, they absorb it. Success and failure unfold without spectacle, guided by limits rather than intention. In this way, the final mystery of penguin life is not how they survive extreme conditions, but how precisely they stop pushing when survival would demand too much. Their strength lies not in overcoming imbalance, but in recognizing it. That recognition, silent, unannounced, and deeply embedded, defines the end of their story. There is a point at which balance does not fail suddenly, but simply stops responding. For penguins, this point is rarely dramatic. No single event marks it clearly. Instead, a series of small mismatches accumulate slightly delayed food availability, subtly altered temperatures, marginally longer distances between feeding grounds and nesting sites. Each change on its own appears manageable. Together, they push the system beyond what precision can correct. What makes this especially challenging is that penguin behavior does not signal distress in obvious ways. There is no escalation that announces crisis. Movements remain measured. Social structure stays intact. Daily routines continue. From the outside, life appears unchanged. Yet internally, margins are thinning. Energy budgets no longer align cleanly. Timing begins to drift. This is where thresholds matter. Penguins operate within limits that are narrow but well-defined. As long as conditions remain within those limits, outcomes remain stable. Once crossed, however, recovery does not scale gradually. It drops off. A feeding delay of a few hours may be absorbed. A delay of a few days may not. The difference between survival and loss can hinge on small intervals that offer no visible warning. Attempts to compensate rarely succeed. Penguins do not possess behaviors that allow them to override these thresholds. They cannot increase feeding rates indefinitely. They cannot extend foraging trips without consequence. They cannot accelerate chick development or shorten incubation without cost. Biology imposes boundaries that effort alone cannot cross. This is why increased activity often worsens outcomes. Longer foraging trips expose adults to greater risk and deplete reserves faster. More frequent movement increases heat loss. Attempting to recover lost ground through speed or persistence undermines the very balance that once ensured survival. The system resists escalation because escalation is destructive within these conditions. At this stage, restraint becomes protective. Penguins reduce effort not out of resignation, but because continued investment no longer produces return. Skipped breeding seasons, reduced chick survival, and lower population growth are not signs of collapse. They are forms of containment. The system narrows to preserve what remains viable. Importantly, this narrowing does not affect all species equally. Those with broader energy margins may persist longer under altered conditions, while more specialized species experience effects earlier. Yet even the most resilient strategies encounter limits. Endurance delays failure. It does not prevent it indefinitely. What is striking is how little behavioral change accompanies this process. Penguins do not alter their social structures to address scarcity. Colonies do not reorganize. Pair bonds do not become more flexible. Communication does not increase. The absence of reaction is not oversight, it is constraint. The system does not possess tools for rapid reconfiguration, and attempting one would likely create instability rather than relief. Over time, the consequences of imbalance become visible only in aggregate. Fewer chicks reach maturity. Breeding success varies more sharply between seasons. Population trends flatten, then decline. These shifts unfold quietly, often mistaken for natural fluctuation until patterns repeat. This quietness is not accidental. Penguin systems are designed to dampen disturbance. Stress does not propagate easily through colonies because responses remain local and limited. Failure does not trigger panic. It resolves itself at the smallest scale possible. This prevents catastrophic breakdown, but also slows recovery. At the edge of balance, the system's strength and weakness become the same thing. Precision, once the source of efficiency, becomes rigidity. The behaviors that prevented waste now prevent adaptation. Penguins do not experiment widely when conditions change. They continue to do what worked before, because deviation carries its own risk. This is why change feels delayed. The system absorbs mismatch for as long as possible, then yields. When it does, the transition is not sudden collapse, but quiet contraction. Fewer successful outcomes, narrower windows, reduced tolerance. Even at this point, there is no sense of failure in the human meaning of the word. Penguins do not struggle against decline. nor do they attempt to recover what has been lost through unsustainable effort. They remain within their limits, even as those limits narrow. Survival takes priority over growth and stability over expansion. What cannot be maintained is quietly released, not resisted. This reveals the true shape of penguin resilience. It is not defined by the ability to overcome every challenge, but by the discipline to recognize when effort begins to cause harm. Penguins persist not by defying limits, but by respecting them. When balance can no longer be held, they do not force continuation. They reduce, withdraw, and conserve what remains viable. In this restraint lies a form of intelligence that is easy to miss. Many systems fail because they escalate beyond recovery. Penguins avoid this by doing the opposite. They endure by remaining precise, by allowing life to continue within smaller margins rather than exhausting it through resistance. And in that quiet choice, the final truth of penguin survival becomes clear. Endurance is not always about moving forward. Sometimes it is about staying exactly where balance still holds.